Is there something greater that protects us? Is there a force that, in the most desperate moments, manifests itself in ways that defy science and human logic? Today, I want to share with you a story that touched me deeply, a tale of unshakable faith in the face of absolute chaos, which took place in a quiet town in the interior of a state, on a day that began like so many others, but ended forever marked by the hand of God. Prepare to hear about the day the earth shook with fury, threatening to swallow everything in its path, but a group of people, gathered in a sacred place, witnessed a miracle so powerful that it echoes to this day. This is not just a story about a natural disaster. It is vivid proof that hope and protection can flourish even in the epicenter of destruction. Stay with me because the details are stunning and make us question the fragility of life and the solidity of our faith. And now, before we even dive into the terrifying moments and the miraculous outcome, if you have someone in your life who needs a special prayer, a friend, a family member, yourself, write that person's name in the comments right now. At the end of this video, we will unite our hearts and add all of these names to our main prayer with a rosary, asking for the protection and grace that were so visibly manifested in this story that I am going to tell you. To understand the magnitude of what happened, we must first visualize the scene. It was a Sunday morning, one of those typical of a small town in the countryside, where the pace of life is slower, and the community meets in the usual places. The market, the square, and of course the church. The main church, an imposing building full of history, was the spiritual heart of that town. On that particular morning, as on so many Sundays, its doors were open for the 9 a.m. Holy Massachusetts. The temple was full. The pews were filled with entire families. Grandparents with grandchildren on their laps, couples holding hands, young people and children forming a vibrant carpet of faith. The atmosphere was one of serenity and devotion. The aroma of incense hung in the air, mingling with the scent of fresh flowers on the altar. The priest, a man known for his wisdom and serenity, began the liturgy, his words echoing softly through the central nave, bringing peace to the hearts present, who sought comfort, forgiveness, and hope in communion with the divine. No one could have imagined that, in the following minutes, this peace would be violently shattered by an overwhelming force, and that the solidity of that ancient building would be tested in an unimaginable way. The Mass proceeded normally. The choir sang a hymn, and the congregation followed along with murmurs and songs. Suddenly, a subtle tremor began. Those who had felt tremors before recognized it immediately, but for most, it was just a strange sensation of dizziness. A chandelier in the ceiling swayed slightly. Murmurs of confusion ran through the pews. The priest paused at first, looking around with a look of mild surprise, but he continued. However, the sensation quickly grew. The floor beneath their feet began to vibrate more noticeably. Decorative objects on the walls began to rattle. The soft sound of music was replaced by a low, growing noise, a roar coming from deep within the earth. The tremor ceased to be subtle and became an unmistakable shaking. The slight strangeness gave way to apprehension, and the gazes of the faithful, previously focused on the altar, now met in silent panic, trying to understand what was happening. The solidity of the earth, the foundation of everything, was crumbling beneath them. Within seconds, the tremor grew into a violent earthquake. The roar became deafening, a sound that seemed to tear apart reality itself. The ground didn't just shake, it moved in waves like a raging sea. The walls of the church, which seemed eternal, groaned and cracked in an eerie way. Chunks of plaster and dust began to fall from the ceiling, a white rain that increased the sense of claustrophobia and imminent danger. The pews moved, jostling people against each other. Screams of terror erupted from the congregation, mingling with desperate prayers and cries for mercy. Children cried, clinging to their parents. Adults, paralyzed by fear, covered their heads with their hands or clung to anything that seemed firm. The feeling was of total helplessness, of being trapped in a box that was being violently shaken by an invisible and uncontrollable force. Outside, the sound of breaking glass and collapsing structures added an extra layer of horror to the scene inside the church. It was chaos in its purest form, and the end seemed inevitable to everyone inside. At the very peak of the earthquake's violence, when the noise was at its highest and the church seemed on the verge of collapsing completely on those inside, something extraordinary happened. While the rest of the city suffered catastrophic damage, buildings collapsing, streets opening up into fissures, the cityscape being reshaped by the fury of nature, within the walls of the church the unthinkable occurred. Yes, there was dust, fallen plaster, cracks in the walls, and a few broken stained glass windows on the sides. But the main structure, the ceiling over the central nave, the altar where the priest stood, the pillars that supported the historical and spiritual weight of the building, remained standing. It was as if an invisible force had enveloped this sacred place, protecting it from the total collapse that was hitting the surrounding buildings. Amid the chaotic dance of the earth, the church became an unlikely shelter, a supernatural point of resistance against the brute force of the earthquake. The tremor was still violent, but the catastrophic destruction that seemed certain within that space simply did not happen at the expected rate. And in the midst of this pandemonium, the figure of the priest stood out with an impressive serenity. As panic spread and people screamed or cowered, he did not run away. He stood firm before the altar, his eyes fixed not on the chaos around him but on something beyond it. With a surprisingly calm voice that somehow managed to rise above the deafening noise, he raised his hands and began to pray aloud. It was not a cry of fear, but a cry of unshakable faith. He invoked divine protection, God's mercy, Mary's intercession. His words, firm and full of conviction, began to penetrate the terror of the congregation, transforming fear into a thin thread of hope. He became the spiritual anchor in the midst of the physical storm. His posture, his voice, his visible faith were a balm to those terrified souls, a reminder that even when the earth fails, there is a safe haven above. He did not say, "Flee," but rather, "Pray, believe." And in that critical moment, his exemplary faith infected and strengthened everyone. As abruptly as it had begun, the earthquake ceased. A stunned silence followed, interrupted only by low weeping and murmurs of relief. The dust began to settle, revealing the surreal scene. The church was damaged, yes. Deep cracks in the walls, chunks of ceiling on the floor, stained glass windows shattered, but it was still standing. And then came the most shocking realization. Despite the intensity of the shaking, despite the rubble inside the church itself, and despite the devastation visible outside through the broken doors and windows, none of the worshippers present had suffered serious injuries, and most incredibly, no one had lost their lives. People standing under the area where the plaster fell were unharmed. Pews that had shifted violently did not crush anyone. It was humanly impossible that, in the face of such destructive force, a historic building with hundreds of people inside could withstand and protect its occupants in such a way. Relief mixed with disbelief and, finally, with awe. They had been spared. They had witnessed, in real time, the tangible manifestation of divine protection that defied all natural laws. The faith that had brought them together in that place had literally saved them. This extraordinary story makes us reflect on the fragility of our existence and, at the same time, on the unshakable power of faith and prayer. That earthquake was a violent reminder that the world around us is unpredictable and often frightening. And in our daily lives we also face our own earthquakes. The illnesses that shake us, the losses that unsettle us, the conflicts that fracture our relationships, the financial hardships that threaten our security. Just as those faithful sought refuge in church and prayer during the earthquake, we too are called to seek constant refuge in our faith, in communion with God and in our community. Prayer is not just a request in moments of despair. It is the foundation of a resilient life. It is daily conversation that strengthens our soul. It is the rosary that intertwines our intentions with Mary's loving protection. This story impels us to forgive more, releasing the burdens that prevent us from feeling peace, even in the midst of tribulations. It reminds us of the importance of having peace in our hearts, that serenity that comes from trusting in something greater, even when everything around us is shaking. And it calls us to seek more conversions, our own, daily, always turning to goodness, and the conversion of those who have not yet found this source of hope. The faith of those faithful and the courage of that priest show us the transformative power of genuine devotion. And again, thinking of all those who need a touch of this protection and hope in their own earthquakes of life, I reiterate the request. Write here in the comments the names of the people for whom you would like us to pray. Let us together, like that congregation, strengthen each other in the prayer of the Rosary, bringing each name, each intention, to the heart of Jesus through the hands of Mary. The story of the church that remained standing and the faithful who were spared during a devastating earthquake in a rural town is a powerful testimony of what faith and divine presence can accomplish. It reminds us that even in times of greatest danger and destruction, hope is not lost and protection can come from where we least expect it. What does this inspiring story mean to you? How does this evidence of a miracle make you reflect on your own journey of faith? Leave your thoughts and reflections on the topic here in the comments. Your participation enriches our community and helps us grow together in faith. If this story touched your heart, if it gave you a new glimpse of the power of faith and divine protection, please like this video so that this message reaches more people who need hope. And to not miss other stories of faith, reflections and moments of prayer that edify, subscribe to the channel now and activate the notification bell. I thank you for having accompanied me on this journey, and may the same protection that surrounded that church cover you and all those you love. Stay with God.